with stuff, and we were here, let's see, what we said that we were gonna do is to continue with the stuff that we weren't finished with from the last time. So these are the main things that we had on the agenda, and let's put them somewhere I can find them easily. So everyone sees my screen, right? Let's see if,
yep.
Yeah,
yes.
See nods, good. And and feel free to break in with questions if there's if you have them. So we had the RestAllowed and the UIAllowed that we added fairly recently, this UIAllowed, and what they are used for and what's the purpose. So in order to show that, we're gonna fire up a MDriven designer.
Have you turned on the recording, Hans?
A good question, and to prove that to you, I'm gonna show it. Yeah. Good that you remind me. So let's say I'm going to save this in a separate place to keep it nice and tidy. Demo. How do you spell mo? Never mind. So we have something like that, and the thing with the RestAllowed is that it involves REST services. So to test that could be quite tricky if we won't allow ourselves to run two systems. So we will do that. We will simply start in another one. Another MDriven designer, and I'm going to save that file as ctemp demo march the server. So let's say we have a system here, that's the server, and that we want to feed up some data as REST data to consume from another. So how we're going to do that? First we need to kick it up as a turnkey system, because that's on the level that we expose REST APIs and REST data. So to make sure that we have that going, I'm going to push here, and I'm going to use the local servers, and these are downloaded recently, so that's okay. And my server 1 here is also fresh dates on, so I'm going to keep it as is and just start them up. So I have them going, and then I'm going to use them in the cloud form and close this form. But before I do that, I probably want to find a browser to my turnkey local server. But I'm going to use these settings in the cloud form, and what that means is actually that this is filled in for me. So this is just the standard non-secret password of 123456 and the standard user A, and this is the URL to the MDriven server that holds the model, and then the turnkey application communicates with the MDriven server. And so let's see if we have this working by just showing something and changing it. So let's head over to my server, and it's this view, and apparently it has editable on here, but let's remove that with the tagged value editable. Let's set that to false instead and save this and upload that model, check that the server has responded, and then refresh the page, and now it's not editable. So we seem to be in control thus far. Good. What we can do now is let's go into view one thing, which is this standard view, and okay, why did it yeah, I was surprised by that blue thing. Okay, this was something I tried to do before. Gonna remove this for now. It's always like this, I get surprised, but then hopefully I understand. So I re-upload with the changes that I made, and that's what I expected. So let's say that we want to serve this data up as REST information instead. Then in order to do that, we could read on REST and expose ourselves as REST is what we want to do. Exposing ourselves as a REST service. So what we can do, and we have recently changed the or made the URLs easier to comply with. So what we want to do is to allow for something like, let's say we keep that one and we have another one, and we would just want to go like REST view one thing and this object, and we would preferably get some JSON data back. But now it says that to get control on what shows when it doesn't find anything, we should have a redirect view model. So that's also a new thing. But in order to allow the REST data to pass through, we need to say explicitly that that's what we want to do. So we can do that by in the model for the server, this is the server and this is the view in the server, and we have the RestAllowed setting on that view. I'm going to turn that on, and going to upload that to the server so that we have new data there. And maybe I have the URL wrong. Rest. Let's see if I do it just like it was before. There are several ways to formulate these URLs, but I think we have a better way than this. original way that I'm gonna show you now. So that was one way. Now I get all the data as REST, and the reason why I said that we had to have two to show this is that is, well, not quite true, because REST you can get it just through the web browser. That was more if we wanted to consume it on the other end, and we need the client to consume it, of course, but I guess we will manage this way. So that was the original way to formulate the URL, but we have recently changed the URL routings to allow. I need to think on what to search on to find that. I wrote this not long ago. Improved routes. So for REST it will look like something like that, like this. And here it says that you should be, I forgot when I massaged it before, I forgot the get command, because you need to say what verb to use if you're gonna have get or put or post or whatever. So in this particular case, which pretty much used the same example, I only need to change that.
And the port number.
Yeah, that was different as well. Good. So now I get data, and let's turn this setting off and see what it says then. We had it off initially, but then I had the wrong URL. So to be thorough, we should test it this way around and do a refresh on that. Must set RestAllowed on VM one thing if we want to get some data here. So that's how that setting works. And of course, exposing data as REST is it's something that you want to do if for multiple reasons, and maybe you have integration into another system, and maybe you have another system that actually is your UI, and you just want to use this as a backend. Then this would be one way to handle those requirements. And in that case, you might want to avoid having this view showing up as a UI. So that's the other way around. Because if we go here and follow the navigation, we have this UI, and what if the requirement is that you should only expose it as a REST and absolutely not as a UI. And then the other setting that we have, UIAllowed, should be turned to false. This is initially and default set to true. And this is really only a case that comes into play when we're doing web and not for VPF, because VPF we have control over all the navigation, but on the web we must live with these deep links, that someone has saved a link or construct a link from logic or something like that. So what we want to achieve with the on the server on the view model, we want to say oops, switched on me. We want to say RestAllowed yes, but UIAllowed false, and save and upload that and check that the server is okay. And if we and the default behavior, if we can't show a UI, is to route to the login screen. So that's the same for all, just not to reveal anything. That so if you try to access this UI with a deep link, you can't. But since we switched on the RestAllowed, we can access it there. And of course, if you want to force a login for that a login would be required for this, you would do that with a access group on the view. But that's probably a different discussion. The access groups that you defined and force someone to be logged in. Okay.
Can I also mention, Hans, that the UIAllowed is also used for when you have server-side view models that you execute. You don't want them to be accessed from the UI. And also, you might want to put the same thing on transformational view models that you use, like we showed last time, that you use transform or deep clone. You want the same thing there, so people can't guess your view models and access the data.
Yeah, so and this is an issue that we discovered when preparing for some penetration tests, and even if all the logic is okay and safe, you might not have thought about what a server-side view model, how that would behave if someone figures out an URL to navigate to it and watch a UI for it, watch it as a UI. So and that's a good addition to think about when adding view models that aren't explicitly meant for showing. Yeah, and next thing on the list was the ActAs expression. And
were you going to make a client for the server, Hans?
Yes, I thought I needed one to show the rest, but then I remembered that we can just pull the data.
Yeah. All right. Yes, I mean, we have so much to show, so maybe it's a good option to go to that right now.
Yeah, so since these were on the list, we should make an effort to go through them tonight. So ActAs. An ActAs is a thing that shows up whenever you're on a nesting or something. So ActAs for actions. So we had some questions about what's the use for this, and to explain it in short is that class actions that show up like this delete detail. It shows up here because it's a class action for detail, and all the class actions associated with detail and its subclasses will show up here. But then again, if we have an aggregation to detail and want to do something special with that aggregation in this setting, so we want even more actions from the aggregation, that would be practical. And and then we could use the ActAs ActAs expression to navigate further to a different object and have the class actions from that object to show up as well. What the hell do I mean? So we have this detail, but let's say that we have a class called subDetail, and we could sort of let's see, we could pick one. And so we have some sub-details that could be part of a detail could point out one sub-detail. Let's update the auto forms to make sure that we have some UI for this. And in this one, I'm just gonna, let's do just a picker to set the sub detail. So the sub detail will show its presentation, and let's do a presentation on the sub, a default presentation on that one called self. And let's take the attribute 1 from the sub detail. Then we have a picker to choose them from. Let's see if we can get this to work initially. Gonna upload the model, and yeah, I turned off this UI off, didn't I? So UIAllowed, that's annoying. True. And yeah, let's just navigate to it. This one, view one thing, and there's a picker here that we can set sub details. All right, but we don't have any sub details, so we're gonna bring up the auto UI for that, auto form for that, and there are none, so we're gonna add one, and let's add another one, 2, like that, back, and we have 1 and 2. Okay, so now if we on sub detail want to have a class action, or rather we have a class action on sub detail, and that class action is doing stuff, and what it does is it takes the self attribute 1 and just appends stuff. And so imagine that this class has like 15 really important actions, and that we are in this situation where we show the details, but we really want to access the action from the sub detail. To save us time, we could of course duplicate the class actions on detail and follow the link to sub detail and do the stuff there on that action as well. But that's not what we want to do. Instead, we want to be more efficient and say that this grid could act as a sub detail. And as we are a detail, we could follow the link to sub detail. And now we have said that we have an ActAs expression. And notice what happens here. Now we get class actions from the subdetails as well. And we can choose to possibly opt out some of all the actions or keep them all as is, followed by the type information. So that would mean that uploading this model, checking that the server has gotten my changes, refreshing the page. So now I have access to the class actions of the subdetails. So doing stuff adds stuff to my subdetail. And switching to that, doing stuff. So that's a way to get access to actions that aren't on the class that you show. And this, the rationale behind this is maybe most relevant to use this when you have link objects. So in this case, when you have a link object like this, it's very often that you have the put the link object in the grid to have the precision, but you really don't have any specific actions on the link object, but you have actions on both the ends. And depending on the use case, you sometimes want to show the actions for this end, and sometimes want to show actions for this end. And of course, you could do a lot of view model actions for the specific cases, or a lot of class actions for the association clause. But it's more practical to say which end to follow. And of course, you don't need to stop by just navigating one hop. You could navigate any way you want, as long as you end up in one object, because each row should be have the precision of one object.
Yeah, that's the main use case. I think I do that a lot. You have a list of something that you work on in a view, and then you just include all the main objects actions and opt out the ones that doesn't fit.
Yeah, and especially when this was introduced, it was also a thing that this end pointed to something that had like 15 subclasses, and all the subclasses had their own forms, and on the subclasses it was the show the form action. And standing here for having precision and being forced to choose between 15 forms depending on the subclass that exists over here, it's almost impossible, or really boring. So for that reason, it was a perfect implementation to solve a complex resolution based on types and expressions. Super clear. Yeah.
So the ActAs for expression needs to result in a collection or a single object?
On a single object to make due on having one object to actually execute the action on.
Yeah, okay.
If you end up in a situation where say, yeah, but I want to have the logic, I want the class to be on the association class, and you have some class actions, I would recommend that you move the logic of the class actions to a method, and then you just have two class actions with both call this method, so you don't repeat your code. So this is a code repetition reduction thing, but if you find yourself you can't use it, use a method to reduce code duplication and then have a very thin class or view model action instead.
Yeah, so the logic here should be moved into a method of sub-detail if it grows or is bigger, anything bigger than this. And that's probably true for most actions.
Yeah. Can I make a little say a thing there that I think is kind of cool? Is that you know, in C# you can always call a method, right? And you can always call a method in OCL too. But there is actually, you can, for every method on a class, you can also have an enable expression, or if it's allowed to be called. And that's a very neat implementation, because a lot of times you want maybe to tell in the user interface if this is supposed to be executed. If you have an action, is it supposed to be executed? And it's really good to put that logic in the precondition part of a method, because then you put that in the enable expression of the action, and voila, you have enable disable feature in the user interface based on code or logic inside the class. Really neat to use, and I forget how to use it sometimes, and it's like, yeah, still very good. So I just wanted to bring it up now when we talk about actions and methods together.
So this attribute 1 is a string, and the length of the string must be shorter than 50, say. So if length is, okay, yeah, I say one thing and do another thing. If length is shorter than 50, this is true. And that's a method called method1. And if I change this to self.method1, I can use the enable expression self.method1 ? So this is the same as for triggers on state machines, etc., to check, are we allowed to execute it or not. So having that and uploading, checking that we are done, and heading over to the application and reloading that, I can do stuff. Yeah, I guess I can do stuff. No, now I can't do stuff anymore. And why is that? Well, it's because it turned really long. So now it's not allowed to use it anymore. Good. Good point. Maybe we should make a note that we mentioned that, so we have that for the...
Yeah, and I think it's an underused feature, so it moves logics to exactly where it should be. You know, when you write a method, why not also add when it should be able to execute?
Yes, that's a good point. So the precondition method preconditions. Yeah, right. Now to a pretty new feature called ViewInView, and I was a bit taken by surprise because it seems that I have broken it, or some of our recent work has broken it somehow in the web implementation. So I'm going to show it in the VPF implementation to just describe what it does. So the view models are defined statically, and we know everything that goes into the view declaratively by just following or looking at all the expressions within the view model. And there hasn't been any way to lift in the result of another view model in here. And that's something that could be quite useful to, instead of showing a list of details like this, we might want to show a list of other views of the detailed object. So to show this, I'm gonna start by creating a new view model, and I'm gonna call it full of imagination today, so I'm gonna call it detail. And that's classified to detail, and let's say that it shows attribute 1 and also attribute 2, and just to show that I'm not afraid, I'm gonna have it show the sub detail attribute 1 as well. Yeah, so that would be a different way to show stuff. Oh, rather, let's do it like this. Add the combo box here. Single link with setter. Yeah, and let's make that one read-only like that. Now this view model is bigger than I want because this is going to be in one row, so let's make it just fit. Now it's just as big as it needs to be to show these things. So this is called detail, and what we can do now is to grab this symbol, ViewInView, brings in a list of subviews. I'm gonna put it here, and let's have that we can do this way. UI first. Type of root objects in views. Well, those were detail. Matching sets, self details. I'm gonna use that one. And what kind of view models are available for things that require detail root? Well, this one, detail. So I'm gonna use that one. All right. So what I expect to happen now is that this expression follows the details and should render the details view instead. So already I can see that it shows up here, the view that I have designed rather than just a grid row. I'm gonna make these so they touch the bottom, because touching the bottom like this is important for the rendering engine on to know that it should extend the things. So as I said, there was something broken. I just discovered this Q2, so I wasn't able to pinpoint what was wrong, but I'm sure we will fix it within short. I'm gonna VPF instead. And I don't have any settings. This is due to because I've had this window open all the time, and the settings are only applied when I close the window. This is kind of a bug. Note to self that we should fix that. Now I have the settings, so I can talk to the same data from the MDriven server from the VPF. So I'm going to start this system and run the model and view all things. I'm going to bring up this thing, and now I sort of get a UI for each row in the grid, and these are fully functional, and you could use them as ordinary, but the save context should go to the enclosing view. So I'm going to save that, and if I should create new rows here, I would expect new groups of view models showing up there. And so, as you can imagine, this can be quite practical, and a particularly interesting effect is that the expression that decides which view model to actually use is part of the details. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we could change we could have different definitions per row, basically. Let's see what that would look like. Let's say we have some data dependent rule that we have some other, we have the detail, and we have another autoform detail. So if there's a data dependent rule, like if self dot attribute 1 equals the special, then we're going to return one type of view model, details, else, and yeah, I'm just gonna close it here so I get the so this one was called detail. Yeah, actually it's better to have that one there and have the autoform detail there. So that's an okay expression. If it's the special, it's gonna flip to that definition. So now it says, whoa, no view model found may be okay in runtime, because it can't make sense of this in design time. Fair enough. But let's see in runtime then. So I'm gonna, yeah, I guess I need to, might as well update the server, and in the VPF I can do the model refresh. I still get the details view, but if I were to, this is this one I guess, paste in the special instead, voila, it replaces with a totally different view model. So now you can mix and have like polymorphic views in one UI. So I think that would be a pretty cool way to to do things. And since this is totally dynamic, as long as it's not this special anymore, it will turn back to the other one. That's pretty cool, I think. Can I get some thumbs up? Good.
Yay! Yeah, it's cool.
And it's a bit of a it's still something that we haven't sort of taken to heart fully yet. It will probably be evolved along the way. But since this is a list, you don't necessarily need to display it as a list. You could just display one. But the good thing with a list is that you can have many if that's what you need to do. But as you could have just one, you could think of scenarios where you have one view for the attributes of the superclass and maybe different views for the subclasses to reduce the things you need to do. And you could also think about scenarios where you use this to implement like a tabulated form sort of view where you have buttons on top and you just switch the content to, because just as you switch the view model definition, you could also switch the data. So the root object.
Yes, and another use is to have, for example, a wizard, and a wizard may be supported by a state machine that tells where you are in a wizard, and then you can switch view model depending on the state. So then you would have a thing that you can do next and go back and forth, and still keeping it at least understandable, because wizards are nightmares anyhow. I mean, they're always difficult to work with, because it's like you have in-place replacement of a UI, which is always difficult to grasp and debug and work with.
Yeah.
And of course, you could bring up these view models, the inside view models separately.
Yeah. So just to show you that we are not that far off on the web, this is what it looks like currently. So what is the blue color? Well, your guess is as good as mine at this point. I don't remember. So there's something that has broken and it's not correctly sized as well. So I need to look into what happened. But if I change this one, it flips. And this is also wrong, that the save state is within the control. It should only be on the external. So this will come along as we fix the latest bugs.
I have a question. Is the view models rendered in a table still, or is it CSS grid? So we can use like columns instead of rows?
Yeah, I guess you... Let's see.
If you want to have them like cards?
Yeah. So no, they are in a table. We render them as a table. But
okay.
yeah, and they are
so it
iframed.
Could be a table within a table, because it could nest in several levels.
Yes, these are actually iframed in on the web. So this is the application. It won't be much overhead because it's the same script, etc. are already loaded for the main application. But well, let's see how it turns out and if it's usable. We think it's an interesting.
It's promising. It looks promising.
I think we'll simplify the implementation over time, but yeah, depending on use cases that come along, it will get more lightweight and maybe easier to use. And so we're looking at different ways of doing tables without the table. So I think there's another development coming along that so you can tell that you wanted like a detailed thing, but it's not a table, it's a grid instead. So maybe these will, merge, but there's no timeline for that now yet.
So, good. Finally, we made it to the end of the planned stuff within the allotted time. How about that? That's a first. Yeah. So, Brian, you mentioned that you follow the view model recipe, if I understood you correctly, to try to render your own stuff based on that. Was that a correct understanding?
Yeah, I'm trying to use the view model as a model on an MVC ASP.NET so that it's, like a typical standard MVC, you'd have a view model that gets passed into the controller. So I'm trying to use the model from the MDriven designer in my ASP.NET code to use that as in the controller.
Yeah. So we can post, maybe post an article or something. I think you need to mute because we get feedback. You can post an article.
So is it your recommendation to let it bind up in offline mode and then get it to an online mode after?
So the online mode is mainly for getting data back, because as you get data back, posted back, you want to, that might be scarce, not all the values coming back, and then you grab it as an offline VM class, and you check those values, and then you apply those values in order to make it online. And making it online, you also need to have access to the identity so that we can look up the correct database object in the database, and then we merge the values that you have gotten back from the post back with the new one, and then you commit that if everything's okay. So that's the basic flow. But we recently rewrote all the logic from the MDriven server to use the MDriven MVC strategy. So we have some fairly fresh examples on how to approach that.
An example would be really helpful. I think I might be running into a bug where it's not setting the associations. So when I set the association, I have this as external ID set, and it puts in the association view model, but in the content of the root, it doesn't get set in that eco object correctly. It stays null.
Okay.
So maybe I'm running into a bug.
Yeah. And also the MVC strategy is sort of restricted in how many different, what level of complexity you can do without.
Yeah, their model binder is kind of crap. I ended up rewriting my own, so I can actually bind up in online mode in my own model binder, but I run into problems where the MDriven view model won't let me set the content I found you can set content not as root method or something that does set it, but then I have the same problem in the root where it's not setting the content, root's content value.
Yeah, but I will put up an example to show how we do it and point you in that direction.
That will be helpful.
Yeah, good. Any other things, questions that we from anyone else that we can answer in 1 minute?
I guess I have one more thing. I'm not dealing with it right now, but I do have a WPF application that works with this too. So I don't know if you have any examples for binding up to view models with a WPF application.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we can point you in that direction as well. So it's always the backlog on documentation sort of grows as much as we add new stuff. So we try to catch up with all the new stuff, and we have some blind spots on the old stuff or existing stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah. So the view models are anyway here to stay. We will, in short, I expect within half a year or something, start to implement for the Microsoft MAUI, which is the SAML forms that will be cross-platformified for .NET 6 to get things running on Mac OS and iOS, etc. Straight from view models. So looking forward to that. We feel pretty lucky in the strategy and the way that the .NET framework evolves, and there's nothing that makes it harder for us to do our thing. It only builds on. So future is looking good. Still. Okay, with that, I'm gonna say thank you to respect everyone's time, and thank you very much for showing up tonight, and hope to see you in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. Bye.
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 Så att titta ut leken. Eller vänta.